more now on the man who President Biden meets with in about 1 hour from now. Staff writer for The Atlantic magazine, Tom McTague, joins us now. His latest piece is entitled "The Minister of Chaos, Boris Johnson Knows Exactly What He's Doing." Also joining us is the chair of the editorial board and editor-at-large at the Financial Times, Gillian Tett. She's also author of the new book, Anthrovision, A New Way to See in Business and Life. And we'll get to that in a moment. But, Tom, what exactly does Boris Johnson know what he's doing?
Well, he knows how to be popular. He knows how to win. He knows how to expectations. That's the key to Boris Johnson. He's a kind of unique politician, certainly here in Britain. He has this ability to connect with people through humor a lot of the time, through making jokes whenever he sees people, constantly putting them at ease. And people seem to like that, or enough people seem to like that, to give him the kind of majorities that he has now. Obviously, like Donald Trump in the US, there is a whole host of people in the UK who despise the man. So he has this very similar kind of love-hate relationship that somebody like Trump might have in the US.
Yeah, you're right about you actually asked the prime minister about comparisons to Trump, and you write in your piece, "So you're not Trump?" I asked Johnson. "I had just been treated to a long monologue about his liberal internationalism and support for free trade, climate action, and even globalism." "Well, self-evidently," he replied, "it might be self-evident to him, but not to others." The former president himself embraced Johnson as Britain Trump, and Biden once called him a physical and emotional clone of Trump. This is the central argument against Johnson. For all his positivity and good cheer, the verses of Latin and ancient Greek that he drops into conversation, he is much closer to Trump than he lets on. Johnson spearheaded the Leave campaign the same year the U.S. voted for Trump, and the two campaigns looked similar on the surface. Populist, nationalist, anti-establishment. What, after all, is Brexit but a rebellion against an ostensibly unfair system fueled by the twin angers of trade and immigration? That aims to restore to Britain a sense of something lost control. Something that is lost, which is control. So, Tom, I guess, we can continue with this, but as the president works to meet today and sort of navigate this meeting, he is the president of a country that is trying to put, or at least on his side of the aisle, trying to put Trump behind us.
Yeah, and actually, Boris Johnson has a very similar job here in the UK, in that what he is trying to say to the world and to the United States in particular is that Britain is back. We are not stuck in the kind of Brexit stasis that gripped the country between 2016 and 2019. He wants to say, look, I'm not the guy you think I am. I'm, pro policies to tackle climate change. I'm a liberal on immigration reform. Britain has aligned itself with Joe Biden's foreign policy on virtually everything. And what Britain is trying to do under Boris Johnson is to say, look, we are closer to you than even Germany, France, and others who you might see as being more liberal. So he has a task that is in some ways quite similar to Biden, is to say we're back as a country, forget what's been going on for the last few years. So there's an interesting, can they strike a kind of chemistry or not?
Katty Kay.
Gillian, when you look at the state of Boris Johnson at the moment, I mean, he went through the beginning of COVID, and to Tom's point, it really was chaotic. I mean, Britain's early year with COVID was awful, but he's now had a very successful vaccine rollout program. Have Brits sort of forgiven Johnson for the chaos and the losses in the first part of the pandemic because the vaccine program has gone well? And has that, in a sense, strengthened Johnson's hand in the country on the whole question of Brexit?
Well, Katty, Boris Johnson's trajectory explains exactly why culture matters, which is a theme of my new book, Anthrovision, because you couldn't predict Boris Johnson's career with an AI robot or big data set. He's really got to where he is by very cannily reading the culture, tapping into the cultural signals that British people really appreciate, like a sense of humor or self-deprecation, and managing against the odds to really come out more popular than before, very much copying things like Hugh Grant, the kind of signals Hugh Grant displayed in Love Actually all that time ago. But he also reflects something else, which shows why culture matters, which is a question of political tribalism. Because he, like Donald Trump, very much surfed the currents of anger towards the elite. And he did so in a very canny way. And the big question now, as you look to the G7 meeting, is whether the political leaders will find a way, both President Biden and Boris Johnson, to actually neuter that populist rage, get something done in an effective way, and work together in spite of all these shocks we've had to the system in the last year.
So, Gillian, let's dive right into your book since you mentioned it. What is Anthrovision?
Well, Anthrovision is very simply a recognition that in a world that's completely dominated by artificial intelligence, we need another type of AI, which is anthropology intelligence, which is really a celebration of what it means to be human and why culture matters. And we've all had a crash course in learning this in the last year with the pandemic. And the reality is that unless we look at those issues, we can't understand ourselves particularly well. We can't understand the kind of problems we're grappling with, whether that's trying to make sense of the inflation data, because it's not just about the numbers or money supply, it's also about cultural attitudes. But we also can't understand other countries. And if there was ever a time when that really matters, it's in a world where we're both very globalized, exposed to each other all the time, as we saw in the pandemic, but also polarized. And we're polarized here at home as well. Just look at what's happening in Congress. Right now, members of Congress could certainly do with a lesson in some Anthrovision, some appreciation of other cultures, simply to work out how to work with each other across the aisle.
Tom, that's Boris Johnson's main job this week, as Gillian pointed out, to work with others across the aisle or across the ocean. So Boris Johnson is skilled at the theater of office. He's skilled with the use of language. He's skilled with the fluency of how to be a showman in office. But do you think, I don't know about his attention span, do you think he truly basically understands the volatility of Northern Ireland?
It's a great question. He does. He feels it. He feels a sort of ownership over it because he signed the deal that is causing a trouble in Northern Ireland right now. He led the Brexit campaign, which has destabilized the region. I travelled with him to Northern Ireland and spoke to him about it. He understands the kind of deep history of a place like that and how it's very difficult to find compromises there. He understands the volatility. He has people around him who are from Northern Ireland and who talk to him about it regularly. But look, he is an English conservative politician. In England, you do not spend much time thinking about Northern Ireland. Boris Johnson does not rely on votes from Northern Ireland. To get into power, he did a deal which turned over his closest allies from Northern Ireland. So there is as ever with Boris Johnson, there is a tension between his emotional, intellectual understanding and the kind of cynicism that you see. He will do deals and he will do things to get power and to stay in power. So that's the two sides to Boris Johnson that you have to understand about him.
This meeting is going to be fascinating today, and we'll be covering it all day on MSNBC. Tom McTague, thank you. We'll be reading about the Minister of Chaos in the new issue of The Atlantic. And Gillian Tett, great to see you. Thank you as well. Your new book is Anthrovision, a new way to see in business and life. And that does it for us this morning. Stephanie Ruhle picks up the coverage right now.